Professor Ricky Yada was appointed as Dean of the Faculty of Land and Food Systems at the University of British Columbia. Prior to UBC, Dr. Yada was at the University of Guelph, where he held numerous leadership roles, including Chair, Department of Food Science Assistant, Vice President Research, Canada Research Chair in Food Protein Structure, and Scientific Director of the Advanced Foods and Materials Network. He's currently one of the co-editors editor-in-chief of the very high-impact journal Trends in Food Science and Technology, as well as serving on the editorial board of several journals. Dr. Yada serves on several research and industry organizations, some of which include Board of Bioenterprise Inc., Board of Trustees of the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutrition, External Advisory Committee member, Arrow Food Institute, member of the Scientific Advisory Panels, Reddit Institute, and Ag Research New Zealand. Over to Professor Ricky Yada's presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Lovedeep, for that introduction. And before I start my talk, let me start off with some thank yous. I wanted to thank Jaspreet for the invitation to participate in this virtual potato symposium and to be among such august group of potato researchers. I'm honored and privileged. I'd like to also do a land acknowledgement. Here at UBC, this has become a tradition, and I'm here speaking to you in my office at the University of British Columbia, and we're on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam First Nation, and we're very, very grateful to be able to share the lands with them. So where did my journey start? Well, the journey started back when I was hired at the University of Guelph back in '84, and I was really hired to do fruit and vegetable research, of which I knew very little, but I was fortunate to hook up with a wonderful researcher from Agriculture Canada, Robert Coffin, who was a potato breeder, and he had the luxurious and glorious title of Potato Breeder for Ontario. Robert knew a lot about agronomy, a little bit about biochemistry, and so he hooked up with me, and he thought, well, I could contribute the biochemistry part of looking at potato research. So it was ready, set, go. So let me tell you a little bit of the background of our potato research. Well, the major use of potatoes in Ontario is for processing, primarily potato chips, and for what we refer to as table stock. So boiling, baking, mashing of potatoes, something you would have at dinner time. The thing with Ontario is that we're restricted to a single harvest, and that precipitates us storing potatoes. Well, storage of potatoes is not that easy. Potatoes, if you were to refrigerate them at temperatures around 4 degrees C, would actually convert the starch to sugars. And those sugars would have a dramatic effect on the quality, especially if you were to process them into potato chips or French fries. And so that would result in a very dark brown potato chip or French fry and a bitter flavor. So we pursued this whole area of what we refer to as low temperature sweetening, that whole conversion of starch to sugars. So we also looked at other factors that contributed to quality. So although low temperature sweetening was our major focus, we did look at other things, and we'll be reviewing some of those things that we did. So in the slide deck that I'm going to show you, it's examples of some of the research that we've undertaken while I was at the University of Guelph primarily. Well, an underlying philosophy of our research lab has always been a mechanistic understanding. So we observe something and then we go, wow, why does that occur? And so this has been the major focus of our lab, a mechanistic understanding. The other thing I'll say is that our research has been highly multidisciplinary, not only in discipline, but in the people that we've partnered with. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some wonderful researchers, students, postdocs, etc. Well, our first foray into potato research and low temperature sweetening was a study that we undertook to look at what was the effect of low temperature storage on some of the chemical parameters? And so we looked at various cultivars and we're looking for what was that connection between composition and quality factors. Well, that started us down a road of looking at other disciplines, and this is one of the disciplines, microscopy. So with this study, we looked at the starch structure and the composition to see if there was some effect of the starch structure on how the starch was broken down to those reducing sugars. Well, that morphed into cell biology. So as people may or may not know, starch is stored in organelles known as ameloplasts. And so we started down this road to look at if there was an effect of the ameloplast membrane and some of the qualities and characteristics of the ameloplast membrane and how that would affect the breakdown of starch to sugars. Well, continuing on our path, we looked at metabolic pathways. And so Alejandro Marangoni, my colleague at the University of Guelph, is an excellent modeler. And so he wanted to see what those pathways were and to see if we could identify some critical parts of those pathways that would affect low temperature sweetening. Well, that resulted in us finding some enzymes that we thought were very, very critical to low temperature sweetening. And that involved alcohol dehydrogenase, lactic dehydrogenase, and pyruvate decarboxylase. So that led us on to a molecular biology project where we looked at the overexpression of pyruvate decarboxylase in a clone. And what we found was if we overexpressed this enzyme, there was greater resistance to low temperature sweetening. Well, we've also actually looked at how breeding can affect quality. So this was a study we did with some researchers at the Lethbridge Agriculture Canada and Agri-Food Station. And we used marker-assisted selection for potato clones in order to find those clones that would produce light-colored chips. Well, as I said in my title, we were going from biochemistry to nutrition. And so we started to look at some of the nutritional components of potatoes and how they were related to what we would refer to as some of the factors that contribute to obesity and type 2 diabetes. And those things are all related to this factor called glycemic index. And so this study was really to look at the nutritional profiles, primarily the starch and sugar composition of various cultivars. Well, again, we wanted to see the effect of processing on these constituents. So this was a study that was conducted by Rena Pinheiro, my research associate, a longtime research associate, and we found, yes, indeed, there was an effect of not only cultivar, but how we processed potatoes on glycemic response. We looked at a study on starch where we modified it. Now, starch in potatoes can take on that property of resistance, and that resistant starch can act like fibers. So John Dupuy, who is a master's student in our lab, looked at the effect of chemical modification of the potato starch with vanillic acid to hopefully make it into a much more resistant type of starch, thereby preventing it from being hydrolyzed to those sugars, which would contribute to glycemic index. Well, in addition to the starch components and hopefully resistant starch, we also looked at some of the other compounds in potatoes, primarily the phenolic compounds. And the phenolic compounds can act as antioxidants. And for those of you who know a little bit about antioxidants are known to be great compounds to consume that would delay or help retard some of those chronic diseases that are associated with oxidation. Well, Finally, we're looking at not only the quality of potatoes from a nutritional point of view, but we also looked at potatoes from a safety point of view, and primarily the relationship to acrylamide. For those of you, again, who are familiar with acrylamide, there was great concern about fried foods and acrylamide content, acrylamides being potential carcinogens. And so we looked at the whole effect of genetic modification, storage, and cultivars on acrylamide content, and hopefully we found that low acrylamide content in such products as potato chips weren't a great contributor to the safety issue. Well, we also looked at the effect of agronomy and its relationship to production and biochemistry. This was a study that was done where a grower was using not only fertilizer in the form of bought fertilizer, but also adding in manure. And we found that the nitrogen content of the fertilizer in total affected the color of potato chips, because one of the other components of the Browning reaction, Maillard-Browning reaction, is nitrogen. So not only is sugar important, but so is nitrogen. We also have done some work on cultivar evaluation and looking at whether or not some of these new cultivars would be commercially viable. This is a variety called Saginaw Gold, and we found that some of the constituents were very, very good and would be a highly desired quality aspect for Saginaw Gold. Well, I'm just going to finish off by this last slide, which talks about new techniques and collaborations. This was a study done in conjunction with the Riddett Institute and Massey. Thomas Doe spent some time at UBC working along with myself and John Frostad, who's in chemical engineering, to develop a new technique to look at gelatinization, and this was an optical microscope. But again, you know, the wonderful thing of this study is it showed that collaboration among organizations can result in some wonderful things. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge all the people that have come through the lab. I've been very, very fortunate to work with some very talented people. And so I was worried about listing them all and missing some people, so I've generically listed the people off. So again, Jaspreet, thank you very much for inviting me to actually participate in this symposium. And I look forward to the panel discussion. So thank you again.
Thanks, Professor Yadav, for sharing your research journey and your research on in the area of post-harvest storage of potatoes, potato composition, and how the composition of potatoes is affected by processing, and also the work that you have done on browning of potato chips. I'm sure the audience would have enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much.